Have you ever wished you could freeze time and walk straight into the past? While humanity still hasn't built a real time machine, there is something that comes close. Rare photographs that capture the exact second history stood still. In this video, I'll take you through some of the most striking and unusual images from the past. Some will move you with their tragedy, others will make you laugh in disbelief, and a few may leave you with goosebumps. Think about it. The final photo of a doomed expedition, moments before vanishing forever into the snow. A young girl walking free from the gates of Auschwitz, her eyes reflecting both horror and hope. The first brave woman who defied the rules to run the Boston Marathon, chased by men who tried to pull her off the track. These images aren't just pictures, they're fragments of memory, frozen pieces of time that whisper stories of courage, cruelty, survival, and change. So buckle up, because what you're about to see will challenge the way you imagine the past. Let's step into history together, one unforgettable photo at a time. Dyatlov Pass expedition, 1959. Imagine a group of young explorers, bundled in heavy coats, smiling as they march into a wall of blinding snow. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a snapshot of adventure, the kind of photo you'd expect in an old travel album. But here's the chilling truth. This was the last photograph ever taken of the Dyatlov Pass expedition. In February 1959, 9 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Russia set out on what was supposed to be the hike of a lifetime. They were strong, experienced, and full of youthful energy. The snow-covered Ural mountains stretched endlessly before them, silent, cold, and indifferent. Days later, search teams would discover their campsite abandoned, their tent ripped open from the inside. The bodies of the hikers were scattered across the snow, some half-dressed despite the brutal cold, others showing injuries that defied explanation. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened on that lonely slope. Theories swirl like the winter winds: an avalanche, secret military tests, radiation, even encounters with something not of this world. But all that remains certain is this haunting photograph, smiling faces swallowed by mist, unaware that destiny was about to write them into one of the most baffling mysteries of the 20th century. The girl who survived Auschwitz, 1945. Look closely at this young girl's face. Her eyes are too old for her year's eyes that have already seen the depths of human cruelty. This photo was taken in 1945, when she walked out of the gates of Auschwitz, finally free after years, inside one of history's darkest nightmares. Auschwitz was not just a camp, it was the very symbol of industrialized inhumanity. More than 1 million people were murdered there, men, women, children reduced to numbers, stripped of names, identities, and dignity. Starvation, disease, and brutal treatment erased the line between life and death. Yet somehow, this girl survived. Her small body endured what countless others could not, and when the Allied soldiers opened the gates, she stepped into freedom, carrying scars that no camera could capture, scars of memory and silence. What makes this photograph so powerful is not just her survival, but what she represents: resilience. For every child who walked out of those gates, thousands never returned. This single image, fragile and haunting, reminds us of the cost of hatred and the strength of the human spirit to endure even the unimaginable. When you look at her eyes, you're not just looking at a survivor, you're staring into the memory of millions who can no longer speak. Kathrine Switzer, Boston Marathon, 1967. Picture this: a young woman, only 20 years old, running with determination on her face. But behind her, chaos erupts, men shouting, reaching, trying to drag her off the course. Why? Because in 1967, women were not allowed to run the Boston Marathon. That woman was Kathrine Switzer. She had entered the race under her initials KV Switzer, so no one suspected she was female. When the gun went off, she blended into the pack of male runners. But just a few miles in, race officials spotted her and exploded in fury. One official lunged at her, grabbing her bib number and yelling for her to get out. But Kathrine didn't stop. Her coach and fellow runners shielded her, pushing the attacker away. Step by step, mile by mile, she kept going, her feet pounding against not just the pavement, but decades of prejudice. She crossed the finish line that day, exhausted but victorious. Her run was more than a personal triumph. It was a revolution. That photograph, showing the angry official trying to rip her from the road, has since become an icon of women's rights in sports. Looking back now, It's hard to believe that something as simple as running could be considered an act of defiance. But in that moment, Catherine Switzer wasn't just running a marathon, she was breaking barriers for every woman who came after her. The crew of the Enola Gay, 1,945. At first glance, this photograph looks ordinary, just a group of young American airmen posing proudly in front of their aircraft. But behind their smiles lies one of the most devastating turning points in human history. This was the crew of the Enola Gay, the B-29 bomber that dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima in August 1945. With that single mission, the world entered the nuclear age. In an instant, tens of thousands of lives were erased, and an entire city was turned into ash and silence. For the men in this photo, it was a moment of duty fulfilled. They were soldiers in the middle of a brutal world war, carrying out orders that promised to end the conflict more quickly. But for the people of Hiroshima, the cost was unimaginable. Families destroyed, generations scarred, and shadows burned into the very walls of the city. Looking at this photo today raises haunting questions. Did these young airmen truly grasp the weight of what they had unleashed? Could they have known that history would forever remember their flight, not just as a military mission, but as the day humanity crossed a line it could never step back from? The Enola Gay still stands in a museum today, preserved as a relic. Yet the photograph of its crew is the more haunting reminder not of technology, but of the choices that altered the course of civilization. Protest against marijuana laws, Vancouver 1960. Now picture the early 1970 seconds, long hair, colorful clothes, guitars in the park, and a generation ready to challenge authority. Amidst this wave of cultural change, one photograph stands out: young Canadians gathered in Vancouver, openly protesting against laws that banned marijuana. Back then, the law was strict, and even the smallest amount of possession could land someone in serious legal trouble. But for these protesters, marijuana was more than just a plant. It was a symbol of freedom, of pushing back against outdated rules, of claiming the right to live differently from their parents' generation. The crowd in the photo looks joyful, almost playful. Signs raised high, smoke curling through the air, music mixing with chants of defiance. It wasn't just about getting high, it was about saying, "We will not be controlled." What makes this moment so fascinating is what came after. Decades later, the very thing they were fighting for became reality. In 2018, Canada officially legalized marijuana, making it only the second country in the world to do so, after Uruguay. When you look at this photo now, it feels almost prophetic. Those laughing, carefree faces weren't just breaking the law, they were planting the seeds of a future where their protest would become policy. Miss National Queen of Catfish, 1945. At first, it might look like a joke, yet this photograph is entirely real. In 1945, a smiling young woman named Gail Hooper from Tennessee stood proudly holding a massive 25-kilogram catfish. Her title, Miss National Queen of Catfish. Beauty contests were a huge part of American culture in the mid-20th century, but they weren't always about gowns, crowns, and catwalks. Communities often gave their pageants quirky twists, celebrating the local pride of their towns. In Idaho, there was Miss Potato. In California, Queen of the Oranges. And here, in the South, the catfish reigned supreme. For Gail Hooper, winning the crown wasn't just about beauty. It was about representing her community's traditions, their rivers, and their way of life. She became a symbol of how even the most unusual celebrations could bring joy to a country recovering from the hardship of war. Looking at the photo now, there's something both amusing and charming about it. It reminds us that history isn't only tragedy and struggle, it's also laughter, creativity, and the sometimes bizarre ways people chose to celebrate everyday life. And maybe that's why this image still captivates us, because it proves that even in 1945, in the shadow of a world war, people found reasons to smile, to gather, and to crown a queen of catfish. Night fishing in Hawaii, 1968. At first glance, this strange lamp glowing over the dark Hawaiian waters might look like a makeshift tool, something to help fishermen see their lines at night. But the truth is far more ingenious. This lamp wasn't meant for the fishermen, it was meant for the fish. Its powerful glow cut through the water, luring schools of fish toward the surface, making them easier to catch. It was a clever mix of tradition and innovation, a practice that blended the ancient knowledge of Hawaiian fishermen with modern technology. The photo captures more than just a fishing trick, it reflects a way of life. Fishing was not just survival in Hawaii, it was culture, community, and identity. Families depended on the ocean, and every catch was part of a tradition passed down for generations. Looking at the image today, there's something almost mystical about it. The black waves, the eerie glow, and the silent pull of fish rising from the depths. It reminds us that human beings have always used creativity to bend nature to their advantage, sometimes with simple tools that seem almost magical. What might look like an ordinary fishing night to the locals now becomes, for us, a window into the timeless bond between people and the sea. The ventriloquist dummy accused of killing, 1924. This photograph might make you smile or shiver. It shows Lester, a ventriloquist's dummy from the 1920s, sitting stiff and lifeless, yet surrounded by one of the strangest stories in American entertainment. According to reports from 1924, 3 elderly women died of laughter during one of Lester's performances. The audience swore that the dummy was speaking on its own, its wooden jaw moving, its voice echoing while the ventriloquist's lips remained completely still. When the police arrived, they found no crime they could prove, but the legend spread quickly. Was Lester alive? The dummy was even taken into custody, as if it were the criminal itself. No charges were ever filed, of course, but the eerie rumor clung to it for years. Looking back, it's easy to dismiss the story as exaggeration, a piece of dark humor from the roaring 20s. Yet there's something unsettling about the photo of Lester. The painted grin, the glassy eyes, the suggestion that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a doll but a vessel for something else. It's a reminder that history isn't only about wars and revolutions. Sometimes it's about the bizarre tales that blurred the line between comedy and horror, leaving us with stories that still make us uneasy a century later. Ben Darwin, the strongman with iron hair, 1925. If you think you've seen every kind of circus trick, think again. This photograph captures Ben Darwin, an American strongman in the roaring 1920s, showing off his most unbelievable feat, pulling a 2.5-ton automobile using nothing but his hair. Yes, you read that right. No ropes tied around his chest, no machines for assistance, only his thick locks fastened to the car as he leaned forward with every ounce of strength in his body. The 1920s were an age of spectacle. Crowds craved entertainment that shocked and amazed, whether it was magicians, daredevils, or muscle-bound performers pushing human limits. Darwin became a sensation not because he was the strongest man alive, but because his act was so unusual, so absurd, that people couldn't look away. When you see this photograph today, it feels almost surreal. The polished automobile, symbol of modern progress, being dragged forward by something as delicate as human hair. It's both comical and awe-inspiring, a perfect snapshot of a time when entertainment thrived on pushing the boundaries of belief. Ben Darwin may not be remembered in the same breath as Houdini or the great circus legends, but this image ensures his legacy. It reminds us that sometimes history is carried forward not just by grand events, but by strange, marvelous stunts that left entire crowds gasping in disbelief. Chinese opium addicts, late 19th century. The dimly lit room in this photograph tells a story far larger than the men lying motionless inside. It is the late 1800s, and China is caught in the grip of an epidemic not of disease, but of addiction. The men in this image are opium addicts, their lives slowly consumed by a substance that had become both a poison and a weapon. Introduced in massive quantities by British traders during the Qing dynasty, opium was smuggled into China from India. The profits were enormous for the West, but for China, the cost was devastating. Broken families, weakened communities, and an empire brought to its knees. By the mid-19th century, addiction had spread like wildfire. Opium dens, like the one captured here, became dark havens where men wasted away in a haze of smoke, their health and futures slipping through their fingers. The tragedy wasn't just personal, it was national. The opium trade sparked wars, rebellions, and humiliating treaties that left China vulnerable to foreign powers. Historians now see it as one of the most destructive chapters in modern Chinese history. Looking at this photograph, it's easy to feel the weight of that history. The vacant stares, the still bodies, the air thick with despair. This wasn't just addiction, it was a slow erosion of a civilization's strength. And yet, hidden in this painful image lies a reminder of resilience. China would eventually outlaw the trade, rise from the humiliation, and rebuild itself. But the scars of the opium era remain etched into memory, as haunting as the smoke that once filled these rooms, Renaissance girls, and the strange fashion of no eyelashes. At first glance, this portrait of Renaissance girls may seem incomplete. Something feels missing, and that's exactly the point. In the 15th and 16th centuries, in parts of Europe, beauty meant having absolutely no eyelashes at all. It might sound absurd to us today, in an era where long, thick lashes are celebrated and even enhanced with mascara and extensions. But during the Renaissance, the forehead was considered the pinnacle of elegance. A high, smooth forehead signaled purity, nobility, and refinement. So women plucked not just their eyebrows, but their eyelashes too, to make the face appear more open and elongated. This fashion was more than vanity, it was an obsession. Young girls spent hours in front of mirrors, meticulously pulling out each lash, sometimes using tiny blades or heated instruments. It was a painful, meticulous ritual, but one that was carefully maintained to uphold the beauty standards of the time. Looking at these portraits today, we might laugh or even cringe. But isn't it fascinating how every era invents its own rules of attraction? What was once a sign of grace now feels almost unsettling. Even ghostly eyes, bare and unframed, staring straight through time. And perhaps, centuries from now, people will look back at our own beauty trends, our fillers, contouring, eyelash extensions, and wonder, what were they thinking? History, after all, has a way of reminding us that beauty is never fixed. It's always shifting, always strange, always telling us more about culture than about the human face itself. Child safety in the UK, 1,930 seconds. This photograph might shock modern parents. Children sit in cars without seatbelts, ride bicycles with no helmets, and play freely in the streets with little more than a watchful glance from adults. In the 1,930 seconds, this was normal. At the time, the concept of child safety had not yet become a priority. Seatbelts weren't mandatory, playgrounds had hard concrete surfaces, and bicycles were often ridden in busy streets without protective gear. To us, it feels reckless, but to families then, it was simply everyday life. The world before World War II was less focused on rules and regulations. Parents often believed that small risks built character and independence. Children were expected to learn by doing, even if that meant a few bruises along the way. Looking at this photo now is almost unsettling. We can't help but wonder how many accidents might have been prevented if modern safety measures had existed. Yet, at the same time, it reveals something about the resilience of that generation. They grew up tougher, less shielded, and perhaps more prepared for the harsh realities of wartime that soon followed. This image captures more than just children at play. It captures a mindset, a world where danger was simply part of growing up, and where safety, as we know it today, was still decades away from becoming law. The Lantern Maintenance Service Vehicle, USA 1910. At first glance, this peculiar vehicle looks almost comical, half cart, half ladder, rolling slowly down a quiet street. But in 1910, it was nothing short of revolutionary. This was one of the first specialized lantern maintenance vehicles in the United States, designed to help workers reach and service the thousands of gas and electric streetlights that illuminated the growing cities. Before this invention, lamplighters carried heavy ladders on their shoulders, stopping at every corner, climbing up, lighting or fixing each lamp by hand. It was exhausting, dangerous work. With this vehicle, however, lamplighters could now be lifted directly to the height of the lamps, saving time and effort while keeping the streets brighter and safer at night. It was an early glimpse into the modernization of urban infrastructure, a reminder of how even the smallest innovations can transform daily life. Looking at the photograph today, it feels charmingly old-fashioned. The workers perched high above the street, the wooden frame creaking, the whole contraption looking almost too fragile to trust. Yet for its time, it represented progress, efficiency, and the promise of a more modern city. In an era before towering skyscrapers, neon lights, and sprawling highways, this humble maintenance cart was a symbol of innovation, proof that even the simplest ideas could light the way to the future. Chinese foot-binding tradition. At first, this photograph may seem almost unbelievable, tiny, distorted feet wrapped tightly in cloth. But for centuries in China, this was considered the very height of feminine beauty. The practice of foot-binding is believed to have begun as early as the 13th century. Young girls, sometimes as young as 5 years old, had their feet tightly bound with cloth to prevent them from growing. The bones were forced to break and reform in unnatural shapes, leaving the feet permanently small, arched, and often crippled. To outsiders, it looks like cruelty. But in its time, bound feet, sometimes called lotus feet, were seen as symbols of elegance, status, and desirability. A woman with tiny feet was thought to be more graceful, more marriageable, and more refined. Families believed they were securing their daughters' futures, even as they caused them a lifetime of pain. The photograph reveals both the beauty and the tragedy of this tradition. For many women, it meant losing the ability to walk normally, enduring infections, and living with lifelong deformities. And yet, in their culture, it was the sacrifice expected for a chance at respectability and love. Today, the practice has almost entirely vanished, denounced as inhumane and unnecessary. But photographs like this force us to confront the extremes of human tradition, how far societies will go in the name of beauty, and how deeply culture can shape what we see as desirable. It is a haunting reminder that beauty standards, no matter how bizarre or painful, can rule over generations with unshakable power. The protective bra for women in munitions factories, USA 1943. At first sight, this strange photograph might even make you laugh. A woman proudly modeling what looks like a stiff, plastic bra. But in 1943, during the height of World War II, this odd invention carried a very serious purpose. With millions of men overseas, women had stepped into factories across America, producing weapons, ammunition, and equipment to fuel the war effort. But factory work was dangerous. Explosions, chemical exposure, and even radiation were real threats. So engineers designed a protective bra, made from reinforced plastic, meant to shield women workers from potential hazards while they handled volatile materials. The idea sounds strange today, but at the time, it was considered modern safety equipment, an attempt to adapt the workplace for women who were suddenly the backbone of industry. It symbolized a new era, when women not only entered fields once closed to them, but also had to adapt to risks no one had imagined for them before. The photo is more than just an oddity, it's a snapshot of history in transition. A time when women were proving themselves as capable as men in every arena, even as society struggled to adjust to their new roles. Looking at it now, the protective bra feels almost symbolic. Women were not just covering themselves against danger, they were stepping into a future where gender roles, safety, and equality were all being reshaped by necessity. Australian soldiers freed from Japanese captivity, 1945. This photograph is both heartbreaking and uplifting all at once. A group of Australian soldiers stand together, their faces gaunt, their bodies frail, yet their eyes radiate something powerful: freedom. Captured during World War II, many of these men had spent years in Japanese prison camps. They endured starvation, disease, forced labor, and brutal conditions that pushed them to the very edge of survival. Every day was a battle not only against their captors, but against despair itself. And yet, in 1945, the war ended. The gates of the camps opened, and these men stepped back into the sunlight. The photo captures that exact moment, the mixture of exhaustion, relief, and overwhelming joy of men who had endured the unendurable. You can almost feel their emotions spilling through the frame, the disbelief of survival, the pain of lost comrades, and the fragile hope of returning home. Many of them were mere shadows of who they had been when they enlisted, but they were alive, and for them, that was victory. Looking at this photograph today reminds us of the terrible cost of war, not just in lives lost, but in lives forever changed. It is a testament to human resilience, to the strength to keep going when everything seems impossible, and to the joy of freedom regained after years in chains. A little girl having breakfast with a lion, year unknown. At first glance, this photograph almost looks like a fairy tale. A little girl sits calmly at a table, sipping her breakfast, while beside her rests a massive lion, its mane brushing against the edge of the tablecloth. The image feels innocent, almost whimsical, but beneath it lies an unsettling truth. In certain parts of the world, during the early to mid-20th century, exotic animals were sometimes kept as pets, even in family homes. What we now recognize as dangerous and irresponsible was, at the time, considered a symbol of wealth, power, or eccentricity. The photograph is both fascinating and disturbing. On one hand, it captures a surreal tenderness, the king of beasts quietly sharing a meal with a child. On the other, it is a chilling reminder of how fragile the boundary is between human control and wild instinct. Stories like this rarely ended happily. Some families who kept lions or tigers as pets eventually faced tragedy when the animals acted on their nature. One such tale is that of the Berber family, whose pet lion turned on them with devastating consequences. Looking at this picture now, we are torn between amazement and fear. It forces us to question how far humans will go to blur the line between nature and domestic life, and at what cost. It may look like a scene from a children's storybook, but the silent presence of the lion beside that little girl whispers a truth. Wildness cannot be tamed by breakfast and innocence. Robert Kennedy after being shot. 1968. The photograph is grainy, chaotic, and heartbreaking. On the floor of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles lies Robert F. Kennedy, his face pale, his body crumpled, as people around him scream, reach, and try desperately to help. Only moments before, he had been delivering a victory speech after winning the California Democratic primary. He was a man filled with hope, ambition, and the promise of change cut down in an instant by an assassin's bullet. The year was 1968, one of the most turbulent in American history. The nation was already reeling from the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. just 2 months earlier. For many, Kennedy represented not just a politician, but a dream, the continuation of his brother John's vision, a chance to heal a fractured country. This photograph doesn't just capture a man's final moments, it captures the collapse of hope. In Kennedy's vacant eyes, in the hands holding his head, in the chaos around him, you can almost feel the collective grief of a nation watching another dream slip away. Even today, the image remains one of the most haunting of the 20th century. It reminds us of how fragile leadership, hope, and progress can be in the face of violence. Robert Kennedy's death was not just the end of a campaign, it was the silencing of a voice that many believed could have changed the course of history. Excited girls at the first Chippendales Club, Los Angeles 1979. The flashing lights, the pounding music, the electric energy. This photograph takes us straight into a nightclub in late 1972 Los Angeles. In the crowd, young women are screaming, laughing, reaching out with joy and disbelief. On stage, the performers aren't rock stars or actors, they're the original Chippendales dancers. Founded in 1979, Chippendales revolutionized nightlife entertainment. It was one of the first all-male striptease troupes designed specifically for women. At a time when society still clung to conservative ideas of gender roles, the sight of muscular men dancing and teasing on stage flipped the script. For women, it wasn't just entertainment, it was liberation, a safe place to shout, cheer, and embrace desire without shame. The photo perfectly captures this cultural shift. The faces of the women in the crowd say it all: unrestrained excitement, freedom, and a hint of rebellion. For them, it wasn't just about watching men take off their shirts. It was about claiming a new kind of space, one where women's pleasure and fun were finally in the spotlight. Looking back now, the Chippendales phenomenon feels like a snapshot of a changing world. It was campy, outrageous, and at times controversial, but it also opened the door to conversations about sexuality, gender, and empowerment. This single photograph reminds us that history isn't only about wars and politics, it's also about the ways people dared to break boundaries, even if it was simply through a night of dancing and laughter. Mahatma Gandhi spinning thread in prison, 1932. At first glance, this photograph seems simple. Mahatma Gandhi, seated on the floor, quietly spinning thread with a small portable wheel known as a charkha. But behind this modest image lies one of the most powerful symbols of resistance in modern history. In 1932, Gandhi was imprisoned by the British for his role in India's independence movement. Yet even within the walls of his cell, he found a way to fight back by spinning his own thread. For Gandhi, the act wasn't just about making cloth. It was about rejecting dependency on British textiles, which had long dominated India's economy and impoverished its people. The spinning wheel became more than a tool, it became a weapon of dignity. Gandhi urged his fellow countrymen to weave their own fabric, to wear homespun cloth known as khadi, and to reclaim both their livelihoods and their national pride. This photograph captures him in that quiet act of defiance. There are no crowds, no speeches, no dramatic gestures, just a man, a wheel, and an unshakable belief that freedom could be woven, thread by thread. Looking at it today, we see more than just a prisoner passing time. We see a leader reminding the world that true revolution doesn't always roar, it can also whisper, in the steady rhythm of a spinning wheel, in the simple act of taking back control. The first female tractor driver in Uzbekistan, 1923. In this black and white photograph, a young woman grips the wheel of a heavy tractor, her expression both proud and determined. It may not look extraordinary at first, but in 1923, this image represented a seismic cultural shift. She was the first female tractor driver in Uzbekistan, a living symbol of the Soviet Union's push for gender equality and modernization. At a time when women, in many parts of the world, were still excluded from higher education and skilled labor, here was a woman commanding a machine that symbolized progress and power. Driving a tractor wasn't just about farming, it was about breaking boundaries. It challenged centuries of tradition in Central Asia, where women's roles had long been confined to the household. Now, in the wake of revolution, they were stepping into fields once dominated entirely by men. The photo captures more than just a milestone in agriculture. It reflects the spirit of an era when social transformation was sweeping across the Soviet republics, when women were being told, "You too can build the future." Looking at this photograph today, it feels quietly revolutionary. The tractor itself may be outdated, but the message it carried is timeless. Progress isn't just about machines, it's about the people who dare to climb aboard and take control, no matter the obstacles. Ortho Fertilizer Company's strategy shift. At first glance, this photograph looks like nothing more than an advertisement for farm products, smiling workers, green fields, and promises of abundance. But behind it lies a fascinating story of business, marketing, and survival. In 1950, the Ortho Company, one of America's largest producers of fertilizer, faced a serious problem. Their ammonium sulfate fertilizer wasn't selling. Farmers weren't interested, and sales were flat. Competitors were struggling too. Instead of giving up, Ortho decided to change their strategy, not the product itself, but the way it was presented. They poured energy into marketing, creating campaigns that portrayed fertilizer not as a chemical, but as a promise. Stronger crops, wealthier farmers, and modern success. It worked. The shift transformed their business, and Ortho soon became one of the most recognized names in agricultural products. This photograph, with its polished optimism, is more than an ad. It represents the moment when companies realized that selling wasn't just about what you made, it was about the story you told. Looking at it today, it feels both nostalgic and revealing. It reminds us that even in something as seemingly simple as farming, history is shaped not only by what grows in the soil, but by the battles fought in the marketplace and by the power of persuasion. Tragedy by the Sea, 1954. Few photographs capture raw grief as powerfully as this one. On a lonely stretch of California beach in 1954, John and Lillian McDonald stand near the crashing waves, their bodies bent by sorrow. Moments earlier, their 9-month-old son Michael had wandered away from home. His tiny footprints led toward the vast Pacific Ocean and then disappeared. The image, taken by photographer John Gaunt, is devastating in its simplicity. The couple stands together, yet apart, two figures swallowed by the immensity of the sea. Their faces are turned away from the camera, but their posture tells the whole story. Panic turned to despair, hope dissolving into unbearable loss. The photograph, later titled Tragedy by the Sea, became one of the most haunting pieces of photojournalism of the 20th century. It earned a Pulitzer Prize not just for its composition, but for its ability to freeze a moment of universal human anguish. Looking at it today, the image still feels almost intrusive, as if we are witnessing a pain too private to be shared. Yet perhaps that's why it resonates so deeply. It reminds us that history isn't only about wars, leaders, or revolutions. Sometimes it is about ordinary people, caught in extraordinary grief, standing helpless before forces far bigger than themselves. The waves crash, the horizon stretches endlessly, and two parents stand in silence, forever etched into memory by a single, devastating photograph. A starving woman in Africa, 1992. This photograph is almost unbearable to look at. A woman lies weak in a wooden cart, too frail to move, her hand stretched outward in a final plea for help. She is waiting for food at a relief center during the devastating famine that swept across parts of Africa in the early 1990s. The year was 1992. Conflict, drought, and economic collapse had created one of the worst humanitarian crises of the century. Millions were displaced, and countless families faced the daily choice between starvation and migration. International aid arrived, but for many, it was too little, too late. What makes this image so powerful is its silence. There are no soldiers, no explosions, no chaos, only the quiet cruelty of hunger. Her body tells the story of thousands of others, children with swollen bellies, mothers unable to feed their babies, fathers watching helplessly as their families wasted away. This photograph became a global wake-up call. It forced the world to confront not only the famine itself, but also the larger issues of inequality, failed policies, and the responsibility of nations to help those in need. Looking at it today, it still pierces the heart. It reminds us that while wars and politics often dominate history books, the silent suffering of hunger has claimed more lives than any battlefield. One woman, one outstretched hand captured forever as a plea not just for food, but for compassion. Vietnamese rice fields after US carpet bombing, 1966. This photograph is not just an image, it is a scar etched onto the earth itself. Taken in 1966, it shows the aftermath of US B-52 carpet bombing raids over Vietnam, where once there had been lush rice fields and green gardens, now lay craters, blackened soil, and devastation stretching to the horizon. For centuries, rice paddies were the lifeline of Vietnamese villages. They weren't just fields, they were food, family, and survival. But during the war, they became battlefields, targeted in an effort to break both the land and the spirit of the people who lived on it. The bombing raids destroyed more than crops. They shattered entire ecosystems, poisoned rivers, and left families without homes or livelihoods. For many villagers, survival meant starting over again and again, replanting, rebuilding, and praying the bombs would not return the next day. Looking at this photo now, it's impossible not to feel the weight of what was lost. The land itself seems wounded, pocked with craters like open sores. It is a stark reminder that war doesn't just destroy armies, it destroys the very soil that sustains life. And yet, amid the devastation, the resilience of the Vietnamese people endured. Even after the fields were scarred by bombs, villagers returned to plant again, to rebuild their lives from the ashes of destruction. This photograph stands as a testament to both the cruelty of war and the unbreakable determination of those who must live through it. You've just walked through history not in the pages of a book, but in the frozen moments of photographs. Some of these images carried tragedy, others showed resilience, and a few reminded us of just how strange and unpredictable the past could be. Maybe one photo made you smile, maybe another made you angry, and perhaps some left you with goosebumps or even a heavy heart. That is the power of photography. It doesn't just show us the past, it makes us feel it. If these stories touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which photo struck you the most? Was it the chilling mystery of the Dyatlov Pass hikers, the quiet strength of Gandhi's spinning thread, or the heartbreaking plea of a starving woman in 1992? Share your feelings in the comments. I truly enjoy reading your perspectives. And if you want to keep uncovering history's hidden stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. There are many more powerful images waiting to be discovered together, and you won't want to miss the next part. Until then, thank you for watching, and remember, every photo tells a story, but together, they reveal the soul of history.